All right, so I wanted to give an update on my kind of keto experiment I've been doing. As I mentioned in the other videos, I've done keto a few times in my life. I did it in high school, I did in college, and I've done it more recently. Those times were more for bodybuilding type results. Here, it was actually more of a health thing and to see if it would help my GI at all. But I had some pretty interesting results from that I wanted to go over. So the last time we talked about it, I mentioned how almost right away I started getting these heart palpitations. It was just beating, what we call a bounding pulse. I would feel it in my head, and I really didn't know what was going on with that. The difference with this time doing keto compared to previous times is I had no carb ups this time. I literally just went straight keto. Now, when you hear that, you probably think that my performance in the gym would be terrible, that I'd be really flat, things like that. I actually did not experience that, and I never really have when I've done a keto diet. I was even doing interval training once or twice a week, some steady state cardio once or twice a week, and then I was lifting weights about 3 times a week. But I really didn't notice any detriment to my performance there at all. So, as I said in my last video, that's when I really started getting those heart issues like the palpitations, the increased heart rate. Here, it actually did start to back off. So, the total experiment was about 12, maybe a little bit more than 12 weeks. And I did some experiments within there too that I mentioned I would kind of touch on in a final video. So initially, with those palpitations, it was just a very odd sensation. I felt like I wasn't able to go to sleep. I would just notice it all the time. Gradually, that did start to fade away, thankfully. As far as headaches go, I definitely got some headaches early on. Those also started to fade. So there is definitely a process where you're kind of learning, like the body is getting used to it. I definitely had to increase my electrolyte intake and my water intake as well. Another thing I noticed was acid reflux. I don't remember if I talked about that in the last video or not, but a lot of people apparently do a keto diet to help with acid reflux. I mean, there's hundreds of anecdotes out there of people saying that it helped their acid reflux. I never experienced acid reflux before I did keto, and I definitely noticed some significant reflux doing that. That did also thankfully start to fade, and I don't know if I talked about this in a video or not, but something I actually noticed really helped was melatonin. There are several studies on melatonin helping acid reflux, and it's just one of those things that I think, I think I did mention this in an interview somewhere, but it just kind of bothers me that it's not even talked about ever by other doctors, because it's something that is pretty much side effect free for most people, and it really does help. The standard of care really is something like a omeprazole, like a PPI, and those can cause a lot of long-term issues. So for me, melatonin was great to take. I don't know if it was that really helped me or just, again, getting used to the diet, but for the most part, the reflux is pretty much gone. So that has thankfully kind of resolved itself. Something that I don't know how to explain when I started this, so I was about 190 pounds when I started, and as you'd expect from a loss of water weight, I lost about 3 pounds in the first week or two doing keto. Now, I wanted to make sure everything was very constant, so I kept calories exactly the same. Obviously, macros couldn't be the same because there were no carbs, so I dropped about 3 pounds. But what was interesting is over the next 8 weeks or so, I slowly started to creep up again and actually got heavier than I was before. Now, I don't think this is something that you should expect on keto. I've never heard of this on keto before, and I'm very meticulous with my tracking when I decide to track. So I really can't explain why that happened. It was very odd. I lost 3 pounds, and like I said, it just slowly went up. And actually, I was, right now, I'm maintaining my weight at about 3,300 calories. I was maintaining on like 2,500 calories and then slowly going up. It was very odd. I'm pretty much stabilized now, and I'm actually intentionally gaining weight, so I'm fine with it. But just something I noticed there that I figured I'd mention. I don't think somebody should worry about that for the most part. Like I said, I can't explain it. I don't know. Something must have happened, but just a little bit of a weight gain there. Now, for those of you who actually really care about being in ketosis, and that, there is a significant argument to be made there. Some people say the actual state of ketosis is very important. They say that for various mechanisms that it's very helpful for your health and for results. Other people say that it's not really due to the ketone bodies. It's more just that you are in a low carb, a low insulin environment. I've seen good arguments on both sides. I think if you're talking about the fat loss effect, there really isn't a need to be in ketosis, but I can see why people would make an argument for it. So what I noticed was actually that, I test my ketones regularly, or I did when I was doing this experiment, And almost within like a week of using the really fatty foods, fatty cuts of meat and chicken, things like that, like beef and chicken, the ketone levels were up to 2 to 3 millimolars pretty quickly, like within a week, I would say. So I wanted to then do another 6 weeks or so with just like quote unquote healthier fats. So purely lean meats, but then adding just tons of olive oil, avocados, and avocado oil. And what happened there was I actually wasn't in as much of a state of ketosis. I was actually around like 0.5 to 1 millimolars most of the time. That is interesting to me. I know people say that things like MCT oil are ketogenic, but for whatever reason, I noticed because I wasn't having MCT oil before. I was just having those fattier cuts of meat. But I really noticed that. Now, I didn't feel any different, but as far as the readings go, 0.5 to 1 compared to maybe 2 to 3. So that's something to keep in mind. If you are really bent on being actually in a state of ketosis, that might be something to consider, that you want to go for fattier cuts of meat rather than purely lean cuts of meat. Now, I did that also because I wanted to look at my cholesterol levels. And that was one of the biggest things I wanted to see with this experiment, is how it would affect cholesterol levels. Because there's certainly a lot of data out there showing that people who do keto diets have a big spike in cholesterol, and unfortunately a spike in what is typically called the bad cholesterol, LDL. Now, that itself has become a very controversial topic in the last few years. I can post some links below as to where that controversy comes from. Some actually show that higher LDL is helpful, and that people who have higher LDL live longer, less disease, things like that. Again, controversial topic, but for the most part, I did notice that there was actually a huge spike in my LDL. So initially, my LDL, for those of you who don't know, generally you want LDL, they say less than 130. A lot of times people will say less than 100, or even as low as you can get it. Mine was about 124, which is actually higher than normal for me. This was before the keto diet, so that was higher than it normally was. I did the keto diet and it shot up like crazy. I mean, more than doubled that value. My total cholesterol went from, I think, around 200 up to, I think, 350, and then I got tested again and it was 370, like very, very high levels. So that was in the first 6 weeks when I was using the very fatty cuts of meat. So then I did another set of blood work 6 weeks later, and that was with all the lean meats and the oils. There, my cholesterol did go down. So HDL was around the same. I think it was around 73, and I'm going to put all these up there because I'm sure I'm not going to remember every single value, so you guys will be able to see side by side. But cholesterol total and LDL did go down, which was, for me at least, in my opinion, that was a good thing. That's what I wanted to see. But what I found very interesting, and this is one of the biggest updates I wanted to give, is that in this third segment of the experiment, I was back to not purely fatty cuts of meat, but a mix of fattier and leaner meats, things like that. Still in ketosis, still very high levels of fat. And my cholesterol levels actually came back in what I would call like fantastic. Yes, LDL was still high, it was around 150. However, you have to look at the total picture there, and my triglycerides were 38. That is extremely good. That is very low levels of triglycerides. My HDL was 93. I've almost never seen a value, especially in a male, because women tend to have higher HDL levels. I've almost never seen a male with an HDL level of 93. So again, very, very good. And then when they break it down into particle number, and LDL small and LDL medium, those were actually less than my starting values. So that's actually, I could make an argument that that was the best lipid profile to date. So I was really happy to see that. As far as other inflammatory markers, my hsCRP, my ESR, which is erythrocyte sedimentation rate, those are all about the same throughout this experiment. That really hadn't changed too much. So all in all, I would agree with people like Dom D'Agostino who say that if you're gonna do this, you do have to give it some time in terms of your body adapting to it. Now, how did I feel? I didn't really feel that much different compared to any other time because I seem to do pretty well on a keto diet. I have more energy, I would say, as far as fluctuations throughout the day. When I have more carbs, I do tend to notice more fluctuations. But other than that, I felt about the same. My results in the gym were roughly the same. There really weren't that many differences. Now, my GI, I did notice benefits there, and that's one of the reasons I did it. And so I may continue to do it for that reason. Certainly, I don't think keto is any magic diet, but I do think it has applications, and that is one of them for a lot of people, and it seems to be for myself. So I would say if you want to try it yourself, give it enough time. I would recommend blood work just because I think it's interesting, but it's also good to do. I don't think enough people do it. Now, if you're doing this for muscle gain, I still don't believe it's probably the most optimal diet for you. I actually don't even think it's necessarily the most optimal for fat loss. I think it's fine. I think when it comes to fat loss, it's more about what you can stick to. But like I said, it was fun to play around with after doing this for so long. It's nice to experiment with different things and see how I react. So if you have any questions about the keto diet, about the experiment that I did, about any other blood work I had done, because I did get very extensive blood work done, just, post down below. I'm happy to answer it. I'm happy to discuss this and clarify anything further.